price of PC parts just keeps on falling, which makes now a better time than ever to build a system that doesn't have to break the bank. That's why in today's video, I'll be walking you through a build that is great for 1080p and 1440p gaming and sits well below that crucial $1,200 price point. I'll be walking you guys through all the parts I picked and why, how you can assemble a system like this for yourself, and the sort of performance figures you can expect at the end with some real world game benchmarks. Let's do this. The NZXT H6 PC case lineup offers an innovative, compact, dual-chamber mid-tower for those looking to find great aesthetics and top-tier airflow. The H6 Flow's design prioritizes GPU cooling and frees up space, while the large, expansive panoramic glass showcases the inside of your build. Available in white or black, with or without RGB fans, the H6 Flow has an option for everyone. Learn more at the review in the card section now, or buy one for yourself at the first link in the description below. What better place to start with a budget build than with the CPU choice? Now for this build, I've gone for the Intel Core i5-14400F. Let me explain. As far as budget CPUs go, AMD have got a couple of options. Their Ryzen 5 7600 springs to mind. The advantage of AMD Ryzen is that the platform, that's the AM5 socket and all the motherboards, are more future-proof in the sense that we know they will support upcoming Ryzen 8 and 9000 processors with any needed BIOS update. Intel's chips, on the other hand, are kind of the last generation of the current LGA 1700 socket, meaning it might seem a bit odd to invest in an Intel ecosystem right now, but the 14400F is a genuinely fantastic value proposition. It offers up an impressive 10 cores and 16 threads. 6 cores are Intel's high-power P cores, but you get 4 lower-power E cores for background tasks, while boost clock speeds get really quite close to that 5 GHz mark at 4.7 GHz. That gives this chip really great single and multi-threaded performance. Plus, the available motherboards are still, on the whole, cheaper than what you'll find for equivalent designs on the AMD platform. This MSI B760M Gaming Plus Wi-Fi is a great example of that. It's a compact, budget-oriented motherboard that basically does everything that we need and doesn't do everything that we don't. Now, MSI are very clearly from the gaming branding aiming this at budget gamers, and I've got to say it looks quite smart. Now, it is a bit basic. Some examples of that, we haven't really got any high-speed next-gen USBs on the rear panel, at least not of the Type-C variety. We do, though, have a USB Type-C front header, so there is still some functionality there. You also don't get PCI Generation 5 for the SSD or the graphics card PCI slots. Again, not a problem in this build. Gen 4 drives more than quick enough, but it's not a board necessarily that you'll be carrying through into the future. And that's kind of worth noting. While all good and well that AMD's got all these great upgrade paths, and it is commendable, like I love to see it, when you're building a more budget-oriented system, the chances are you're not buying a motherboard with the kind of features you'd still want to keep if you upgraded to a Ryzen 7 or Ryzen 9 later. Spending extra money here is just a waste when we could pour that into our CPU or GPU, which I'll come on to in a moment. Talking of installing the processor, that's a dead easy task. If you've not done it before, watch carefully. All I'm going to do is lift up the arm on the processor, push it down and out, then lift up the socket cover from the bottom. Once I've done this, I'm going to drop the CPU into place. All our text is reading upright, the same orientation as our MSI text on the motherboard. Socket cover goes down, and then we're going to secure the retention arm into place. And it really is as easy as that. Now, the 14400F does come with a stock cooler, but we won't be using one. More on that in a moment. Before that, the RAM or memory is next. I've got a 32GB kit of Team Group's T-Force Delta DDR5. Now, this is where I kind of break my own rules slightly. Obviously, one advantage of Intel is you can get cheaper DDR4 memory. And in a recent $800 build, I recommended doing just that. When you get to that $1,000, $1,100, $1,200 overall build budget, I think getting DDR5 makes way more sense, as you're going to be able to carry it forward into builds for years to come. Unlike a motherboard, which just isn't going to have the features you'll be after for a high-end system, this 32GB kit of RAM can be used in future or combined with another identical 32GB kit for 64GB in this build or any potential future system. It also looks good, pretty reliable. We have really good experiences with Team Group memory. Them and Corsair seem to be the most reliable when it comes to avoiding any boot up issues and that kind of thing. Storage is also going to install into place at this stage. Crucial's 1TB P3+. Again, this is a Gen 4 drive saturating all the bandwidth of our included M.2 slot. It's going to give speeds in the region of about 5 gigabytes a second. For context, this is like 12, 13 times quicker than the fastest SATA SSDs. Pretty rapid, but you can find a terabyte for under $60, making it one of the, if not the best value SSDs on the market right now. Now, do be careful with the M.2 drive. You want to be a little bit delicate, as it is one of the most easily snappable components, believe it or not. And go ahead and just unscrew our gaming M.2 heat shield. God, I'm really not sure about the gaming branding, but either way, once it is unscrewed, remove it from the slot and then slide the M.2 drive into place. Push it down over the included, what looks to be a toolless securing mechanism. Like to see that on a budget board, could work, MSI, and then re-add our gaming M.2 heat shield into place. Screw it down on either side. That's going to give our drive data, power, and help to keep it cool. I referred to the cooler choice briefly earlier in the fact that we're not going to go for the stock cooler in this build. Now, a couple of reasons for that. They're quite noisy. You don't tend to get particularly good CPU cooling. They exist to try and keep your chip cool without you spending any more money. And they do that pretty well. But in this build, this cooler was like $27, $28. It's Cooler Master's Hyper 212 Halo Black. Now, I've got to actually commend Cooler Master as well here. For a long time, their 212 range was great value, and then they seemed to ramp the price up for I don't know what reason and lost out to brands like Deepcool as one example. Thankfully, they seem to have realised their mistakes and corrected them. They are back into the fold for this build. If they were too pricey, I'd be recommending something like the AK400 instead. After a cursory glance at the manual, it transpires we need to pop this back plate through the rear of the motherboard and then attach these Intel brackets to the bottom of the cooler. It really is nice and simple. Don't forget to drop a thermal paste and leave the fan off until later. We're going to add the fan on after the whole motherboard assembly has been moved into the case. The next stage then has to be the case. Now, I picked that up expecting it to be heavy. It's not heavy. This is Cooler Master's Q300L V2. And again, Cooler Master, I'm going to give you a compliment in a slightly backhanded fashion. When this came out, it was too expensive. Now it's cheaper, which makes it good value for a build like this. Cooler Master have long been a really great brand when it comes to cheaper cases. And this Q300L V2 is no exception. They've upgraded the side panel from acrylic to glass on the V2 version, which I appreciate. And you'll notice that the dust filters actually kind of form up the main aesthetic features of the case. It's built in a very cheap, very simple manner that helps keep it compact and affordable. You can see from inside it's quite small, only room for micro ATX motherboards. You get a single airflow optimized 120mm exhaust fan in the rear. Granted, a couple more fans wouldn't go amiss in a chassis like this, and I'm going to add some Cooler Master RGB fans in the front. Fairly cheap, fairly affordable. The rear panel is screwed in all four corners, a little something like so. These are actually rubberized, meaning you can lay the case down flat if you want to use it in that orientation. Take these off, strip all the panels off, not particularly hard in a case that's so small and quite so basic as far as its trim goes. But remember, the money that we're saving on the case here is allowing us to pour into that CPU and GPU, giving us much better gaming performance. For this stage, I am going to lay the case down flat. It's something I often do in builds just to make the whole process that little bit easier. Move any of your fan wires or fan cables out the way and locate each of the standoff locations. You should see 3 at the top, 3 along the middle, and 2 down towards the bottom. Make sure these match up perfectly with the holes on your motherboard, and then it's a super simple case of sliding the board into place. But wait, remember to clip in the I/O shield, something you don't really have to do very often nowadays, as forgetting to do this is going to create a headache a little bit later. Screw the motherboard in through each of those 8 screw hole locations using screws that come included with the Q300L V2. Once that's all sorted, it is power supply time. And again, I feel like this video is just me throwing out compliments left, right, and center today. Corsair CX650 liked this for a long time, but it was too expensive. They've made it cheaper. That makes me happy. I'm a simple man to please. 80 plus bronze, fairly efficient, 650 watts, more than enough for the build today. And as far as the fact that it's non-modular, there aren't actually that many cables that you'll need for a fairly budget-oriented build like this anyway. Now, looking at the case here, there is actually a bracket which needs to be removed. That's this bracket just here. This is easily achieved with 4 screws at the rear of the case. And once they've been removed, you can see here, we've got a frame that the power supply is going to slot into. Screw the power supply in here. I'm going to go fan down to pull in air from underneath. There's just about enough clearance, but you could also have fan up to exhaust air out of the case if you wanted to. I'm going to do the cables and wiring later. First, it's graphics card time. Now, this is really quite exciting and shows just how far we've come, especially since those times where the big GPU boom happened and you just couldn't buy a card for love nor money. Now, you can get a 7700 XT. This one was $409 with the rebate. That is unbelievable. To compare that to Nvidia's 4070 as an example, that's $140 cheaper. It's $200 cheaper than a 4070 Super. Heck, it's basically even on par with the MSRP of the 4060 Ti 16 gig and cheaper than most AIB models of that graphics card. Unbelievable. 1440p is where this graphics card belongs. And that is what makes this build just so special for that $1,200 price point. Now at 1080p, you'll find the 7700 XT finds life even easier. And while AMD graphics cards do have their disadvantages compared to Nvidia, things like the ray tracing support not being nearly as good, or of course the fact that AMD's FSR is still nowhere near as good in my view as DLSS, especially when it comes to frame generation. However, rasterization performance is superb. You get 12 gigabytes of video memory on this card. That's more than the 4060, base model 4060 Ti, and base model RX 7600, all in a package that's incredibly power efficient and affordable. Wow. I appreciate it sounds like a sales pitch for the 7700 XT. AMD have just done such a good job when it comes to more budget and mid-range GPUs. And without AMD right now, we'd all be stuck with a 4060 and 4060 Ti. And we don't want that. The card in this build is going to slot into the top and only graphics card slot on our motherboard, and is really easily done. A little something like so. Get it lined up, clip it into place, and then a couple of screws, again included with the case. These are the same screws, size-wise, as what we use for the power supply. Will secure the card in without too many problems. Cables and wiring is next. I'm going to start off with this, the 24-pin motherboard power cable, which goes to the right-hand side of the board. CPU power is next, up to the top left, and then of course going to power up the graphics card with a 8 and 6-pin power connector from the PSU as well. All that remains then is to pop a couple of those Cooler Master RGB fans at the front, and then boot this thing up to check out performance. But first, how good does this quite affordable build look when it's all powered up? There's only one way to find out.
Mirror, mirror on the wall. Is it better? Watch me fall, broken up in pieces. Can you see me bleeding? Mirror, mirror, tell me please, if these broken memories are enough to break free. Will it take time? Slow.
Moving through into performance, and it's especially important we see exactly how this build performs, especially since I've talked so much about this build's 1440p capabilities. So what better way to test that than in Call of Duty's Warzone 3 first of all, at 1440p. Here, at 1440p high settings with FSR enabled, the build achieved a staggering 277 FPS. I mean, that is absolutely crackers. Of course, FSR is helping us along a little bit, but even disable this and you're still going to be seeing frame rates well into that triple digits. Something which is going to ensure you get competitive gameplay even at this higher 1440p resolution. Move through into Starfield next, and here the result crashes a bit more back to reality, but still holds up really well at 1440p. 94 FPS on average is more than enough for Starfield, a game that's more of an RPG than a competitive FPS title. The game looked great, it was smooth, we didn't see any major frame rate drops. All in all, it provided a fantastic gaming experience. Hogwarts Legacy was next up. 139 FPS here at 1440p high is once again yet another great result, and shows the performance prowess of the 7700 XT. Move through into Fortnite at 1080p. Here at competitive settings, that's everything tuned down to low except the render distance, which was set to far. The build achieved an impressive 347 FPS on average. Again, we saw little by the way of frame rate drops, pretty consistent frame rates overall, and certainly what I would regard as a competitive gaming experience. Apex Legends also performed well, back up at 1440p this time around, high settings across the board, 195 FPS on average. Wow, unbelievable set of results. It's even took me by surprise when I was testing this build just how well it's actually holding up. Formula 1 is another great example of this, one of my personal favourite games and best used with something like a sim rig. Here, performance again great, 177 FPS on average. Finally, to wrap things up, we also tested out Cyberpunk, a game that obviously runs better on Nvidia GPUs with their improved ray tracing capability, but how well does AMD hold up? Pretty well it turns out. 1440p, our second lowest frame rate yet at just 112 FPS on average, but by no means a bad result at all. What do you guys think of this build? A system that looks good, but is definitely more about performance. Let me know. You can find links to all the parts in the description down below. Get subscribed if you enjoyed this one, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.